Chapter 14 King Richard and the Black Witch. After breakfast they set off early before sunrise without incident. They drove their sand ships non-stop, at least urging along the empty dirt road, not wanting to make it easy for more thieves to steal the rest of his shipment. They pulled into the cargo bay at the rear of the castle, right on schedule, in the late afternoon, and soon the cars were being opened after Johnny and Eiko unlocked them. To Eiko and Johnny's dismay, King Richard and a teenage boy dressed all in black robes trimmed with silver came to the docks. "Oh, goddess, no," Ali muttered unhappily when he spotted his client. Then he straightened his shoulders and walked slowly to the stocky king and the plain, unremarkable-looking boy next to him, dressed in their finery. Soon they could be heard speaking in a mix of apologies, angry retorts, demands for explanations, and a refund for the down payment of the lost slaves. Meanwhile, Johnny and Eiko made Precious and the three rats stay out of sight. Richard hated the rats, and they worried that he might take a shine to the Precious as a kind of replacement for his lost harem. Both Johnny and Eiko were outwardly calm as they watched the cargo being offloaded. They watched it was inspected and inventoried before it was removed into the storage area under the castle, where later it would be distributed. In truth, they were uneasy about being so close to Richard and the Black Witch. Johnny was confident his illusion and protection spells and his necklace pendant would hold. No one would recognize him. Eiko and Johnny also made sure that they didn't dress conspicuously. Eiko was dressed neatly but plainly in a loose split-skirt blouse, sandals, and light linen robe worn open in the front, all in earth tones and blended with the colors of the desert. Johnny wore a similar outfit to the one he wore when he was hunted by the royal guards, all in dust and sand colors. They both tried not to stare too openly at the king or his witch, to keep a low profile as possible. The hope that they would escape notice turned out to be vain, however. "You!" Ali shouted angrily at Johnny. "Fat oaf! Come and explain to the king how you lost his cargo!" "My name is Timothy Smith, not Fat Oaf," Johnny snapped back, trying not to sound as nervous as he felt. "I'm sure your explanation is enough for His Majesty." "Whatever your name is, I command you to come here and explain yourself," Richard insisted imperiously as he turned his mud-brown eyes on Johnny and glared at him. Grating his teeth, Johnny did his best to look humbled and walk over to the king. Richard looked fit to explode, his fair skin flushed with rage. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty," Johnny apologized, resigned to get this over with as quickly as possible, so he could escape Richard's attention. He wished he could hit the pompous oaf across the nose, since it was partly Richard's fault Johnny became entangled in this whole affair. "He's not sorry at all," the Black Witch said, gazing intently at Johnny. Even his voice seemed plain and unremarkable. Yet it was also cold and dead. Johnny couldn't quite pinpoint what made him think that. He looked at the boy. Their eyes locked just for a second. Johnny quickly looked away, shifting his gaze back to Richard. The boy was not much to look at physically, but there was a definite sense of wrongness about him that was getting more stronger by the moment. He didn't like meeting that kid's eyes. There was something vaguely frightening about him and deeply corrupt, as if he was rotting from the inside, even though there was no visible sign of illness. "Careful, man," Richard smiled wickedly at Johnny. "He may not be a most powerful practitioner, but he's proven himself useful as an infallible lie detector. Now tell me honestly, what happened to my slaves, and why weren't you able to drive off the thieves?" With an uneasy glance at the boy, Johnny mentally braced himself to do as he was bidden. He knew if he spoke only the truth, the boy wouldn't be able to tell when he was holding back information. He could only detect an outright lie, and Johnny knew that was a flaw in living lie detectors. Mentally sending a heartfelt thanks to his birth parents' insistence that he thought about magic, he said, "Well, Your Majesty, we needed to make camp so the slaves could get some fresh air." Johnny found himself trailing off and looking again at the boy, staring intently at him. Something was pulling at him to look at the creepy kid. "Well?" Richard demanded impatiently as his face reddened a shade darker. "Don't just stand there. Speak up." With an effort, Johnny quickly snapped his eyes back to the king's glare, which was more preferable than the Black Witch's dead-eyed stare. We needed to stop at the camp because—" Again his eyes were drawn back to the boy, only now his eyes were drawn to the pendant around his neck hanging by a black silk cord. It was a small tubular perfume bottle with an ornate lid tightly sealed shut and reinforced with a blob of black wax that held a binding symbol pressed into it. Johnny felt suddenly cold looking at the black swirling contents that looked like a cross between liquid and gas. Blacks and darker blacks rolled around and round, making him feel dizzy and slightly nauseated. His nephew moved inside him as if in protest. Some instinct screamed at him to look away, and it was very important not to look at the contents of the bottle. But he couldn't look away. Even as he gathered his will to at least close his eyelids, his eyes remained open and glued to the swirling depths. All awareness of his surroundings fell away. Something was reaching out to him from the darkness with a sickly sweet stench of rot. Eyes, like two pinpoints of teeny flames, glared out at him and chilled his soul. With sudden recognition, Johnny would try desperately to look away. This entity's eyes was not something any mortal creature should see. "No, I can't make you free me. You're too pure a spirit, too stubborn. No room for me to corrupt you and take control," a voice said in disappointment inside his head. His consciousness had stripped away all his natural barriers, the ones that everyone had to protect their vulnerable spots in their souls, so the entity could examine every inch of him from the inside. Essentially, it had raped him with its cold, unfeeling regard. His eyes let go, losing interest in Johnny. The sound returned, and the stench in his nose and mouth faded. The entire encounter must have lasted only for a second, though it felt like minutes. A number of things happened all at once. The boy, realizing what Johnny was looking at, slipped his pendant under his robes while the king wasn't looking. Richard was looking daggers at Johnny and shouted at him, "What's wrong with you? Have you gone suddenly deaf? Answer me, you idiot!" Johnny swayed and clutched his stomach and barely managed to avoid retching on all three of the spectators as King Richard barked out his last word. He heaved once more, as they jumped back to avoid the vomit, then stood up coughing as he pulled out a handkerchief from his pocket to wipe his mouth. Then he folded it over and wiped his brow, now damp with cold sweat. He felt a trickle of moisture on his upper lip and he used his handkerchief to wipe that off, only to discover it wasn't sweat, but blood. Quickly he pressed the cloth back to his nose as black spots appeared at the corners of his vision, and the air gained a barely perceptible greenish tinge around him for a split second. The encounter had set off the green ward, but it had returned to invisibility as quickly as Johnny noticed it. It had tried to protect him, but this attack had been spiritual and not physical, so it wasn't much help. "Are you all right, man?" Richard said with some concern as he raised his own handkerchief to his nose and mouth and backed away a few more steps. He was obviously concerned that whatever was wrong with Johnny could be contagious, and he didn't really care about Johnny's well-being. "Tim?" Eiko said at his side, grabbing his arm and making sure he was steady on his feet. "No! No! Bark, bark, bark!" cried the three rats weakly in alarm as they chased Precious as she burst out of the Dunley's living quarters, wearing not a stitch save for her charm necklace. "Daddy!" she cried out as she ran to him, her illusion-dyed curls flying back. Alarmed, Johnny growled angrily, "I told you to stay inside, and get some clothes on, girl!" Precious stopped dead in her tracks, so abruptly that the rats nearly crashed into her legs before they could stop. In spite of understanding her mistake, Precious couldn't help crying at Johnny's harsh words. He normally didn't speak to her that way, but when she saw him fall suddenly ill through the window, she forgot every precaution and tried to go to him. Eyes wide and tearing up, lip trembling, she turned her heel and fled back to the cargo ship, rats following at her heels as fast as they could go, urging to hurry to get out of sight in a mix of illusory barks and squeaked words. "Please forgive us, sire," Eiko pleaded with the king, who was staring interestedly after Precious and still holding his handkerchief over his nose and mouth. When Richard's gaze shifted to Eiko, she continued, "If you please, your majesty, I think it best if my husband were to lie down. I can handle the paperwork as well as he can." Seeing an opportunity to escape, Johnny did his best to look even more wretched, which apparently wasn't too difficult, and he had no problem convincing them that he was on the verge of throwing up again. Looking disgusted and alarmed, Richard barked from behind his handkerchief, "Yes, do that! Take him away!" "Thank you, sire," Eiko said in obvious relief as she helped keep Johnny on his feet as she led him back to his sandship. As soon as she got inside, she sat Johnny down on the closed toilet in the bathroom, leaving him there to convert the dining area back into a bed. Demon. The word swam to the surface of his mind as he again saw the flaming eyes staring at him, right into his very soul. How had the boy managed to summon a demon? Only the most powerful practitioners could do that, unless the boy was more powerful than he was letting on. Or maybe the bond that held the demon prisoner had been passed to the boy? Johnny thought it likely the latter. Only crazier practitioners summoned demons. Even the most evil black magic practitioners knew better than to meddle with the goddess's dark children. There were a lot of conflicting theories about demons, but on some points all practitioners agreed. Rule 1. Leave demons alone. Avoid them at all costs. Rule 2. A demon that has been bonded will only do as much as it was told to do word for word. It will never volunteer its services, and it will use every loophole it can find to make trouble. Rule 3. Never look a demon in the eyes. Johnny now knew firsthand why one should not look at one in the eyes. He thought as he examined his handkerchief, saw that his nose had stopped bleeding, and that his long fingered hands were trembling. Rule 4. Demons are corruption incarnate, likely created by the goddess as a means of maintaining the balance of nature and magic. Rule 5. When a demon is summoned, it creates an imbalance in nature, requiring the goddess to make a series of countermoves that eventually ends with the demon's return to where it came from. Rule 7. An improperly released demon will immediately turn on the former holder of its bond and eat him before returning home. Rule 8. Johnny didn't know why he was counting off the rules of demons. He wasn't even recalling them in correct order, though the information was accurate enough. He guessed his mind was scrabbling for a way to deal with the trauma of his encounter with the demon. The tremors in his hands had spread to the rest of his body, and he suddenly realized the baby wasn't moving anymore. Fearing the demon had hurt the boy, Johnny tried to remember what his mother had said to do if a baby lay still for too long, and the mother wanted to check and see if he was okay. Then he remembered. Using his right fingertips, he pressed them firmly into his lower abdomen. At first, nothing. Then a firm wiggle and kick. Sighing and nearly weeping with relief as he tried to breathe normally, Goldie appeared on his lap, looking like her normal rat self because she had turned her dog illusion off. "You okay?" she asked in concern as she stretched up so she could use her nose to sniff his face. "I don't know," Johnny answered truthfully, as he picked her up and gently hugged her to his chest and tried to stop shaking. The sweat on his skin had dried. He felt raw and cold from the inside out. Just then Aiko returned to get Johnny into his bed, and Goldie squeaked in alarm, "He's burning up!" Aiko swore in a mix of Arabic and Chinese as she helped Johnny to his feet and to bed. She bid them to stay put, ordering her rats to keep an eye on Johnny and report to her immediately if there was any changes, before leaving the ship for her own. Precious finally came out, fully clothed in the loose breeches and blouse Stephen had given her. They were getting a little short for her and would soon need replacing. "Daddy?" she asked cautiously as she approached his bed. "I'm sorry." "Come here, baby." Johnny smiled at her weakly. He needed the touch of living beings that he loved. It seemed to help to melt away the coldness inside of him a little. "I'm not angry with you. You worry me, little girl. Never forget to wear your clothes in town. And no matter what, I told you to stay hidden." "I was so scared," Precious said as she curled up next to Johnny and lay her head on his shoulder. Johnny held her in his left arm and continued to hold Goldie and pet her with his right hand. "You're so hot!" she exclaimed in alarm. "I'm freezing," Johnny replied as he helplessly shivered even harder. Aiko returned at that moment with a steaming cup of some kind of strong-smelling concoction. Johnny identified it by its smell as a fever-reducing tea. "Ugh!" Johnny cried as he wrinkled his nose and his stomach threatened to rebel. He knew he needed it, but he could not make himself drink it. He would only retch it up again. "Thanks, Aiko, but I can't. The smell alone." Eyes widening understanding, she poured out the tea into the sink and rinsed out the cup. "Sorry." Aiko apologized, then asked as she wet a dish rag with the cool water to place on his forehead, "What happened?" "The boy had a DD contained in the perfume bottle around his neck," Johnny replied through his chattering teeth. He made no effort to remove the cold rag from his head. He felt cold and everyone said he was hot. Not a good sign. It looked at me." "Why would that make you sick?" Precious asked as she sat up a bit to look at him in the eyes. Johnny could see the mix of curiosity and worry in her expression. "How could a demon be contained in a little bottle? They're huge." "Demons are a long list of seeming contradictions," Johnny replied as he tried to gather his thoughts, which were rapidly skittering away, into some semblance of a teaching lecture. He had yet to teach her much about demons. Most of what demons were about was too awful for young ears, and he had been putting the lesson off. "Let him rest," Goldie told her. "I can tell you what you want to know."